Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be doing a long-awaited video about gouache. So gouache is a water media. It's similar to watercolor. It was created over 600 years ago, and unlike watercolor, it was designed to be opaque. So you could layer on thicker layers, sort of like acrylic, but I'd say it's kind of like if acrylic and watercolor had a baby. Similar to watercolor, it has a matte finish. Watercolor and gouache can be used together. It's generally used to do lots of quick sort of painting since it dries very quickly. So lots of people will use it for doing like landscapes and such. I think in the earlier days, European artists would use it for doing their landscape paintings, quick landscape sketches. And then in the 20th century, through the crazy magazine era, it was used for a lot of illustrations as well as animations. You can kind of tell in some of like the old Disney movies and such, and the backgrounds and whatnot, they'll use gouache. It consists of just a pigment, water, and a binding agent. It's kind of tricky to match, so if you mix a specific color, trying to find the color again is a bit tricky since when you paint with it, it dries a slightly different color. The light tones usually dry and become darker, and the dark tones usually dry and become lighter. So it's a little bit tricky, but the outcome is pretty amazing. Gouache is re-wettable, and I think it's re-wettable for a few years actually. So unlike something like acrylic where you paint it and then you leave it, it's dry, it's done, you can't rework it. And oils, you're able to like work with them a little bit until they start drying again. So this is completely re-wettable. It's even different than watercolor in that sense, so you can leave something sit for a long time and you can come back to it. If you apply layers extremely thick, like impasto style, it will crack. So keep that in mind if you're wanting to try it. I wanted to keep my sketchbook for my sketchbook tour video, but I'll show you guys these two paintings for an example of what I have done with gouache. I've done a few things with gouache actually. I love painting on black paper with it. But these are just a couple examples. You can layer it, as you can see, and it's really awesome for landscapes. It's very fun. You can't really see the range of color here. Oh, there you go. So it is tricky to get the same color twice, so you can see lots of variations of color, which actually turns out pretty awesome. I'll zoom back out. Sorry for the creakiness. So the gouache that I use is M.Graham and Co. And they seem to be pretty awesome. Normally companies that make gouache will also make watercolors, so you can use them together and they pair up nicely. But even if you don't want to buy the same company, you already have watercolor that's a different brand, you can still use them together fine. So let's do a comparison between watercolor and gouache. Alright, so I got my paintbrushes. This is just a tube I got from the art store. I tried peeling off their pricing sticker, and as usual, it would not come off. That is like one of my biggest pet peeves ever. The last thing you want when you're spending money on something is to have to make it so it's actually usable and doesn't stick to everything. I'm just going to use my Van Gogh paintbrush here. It's a paintbrush that I got with my Van Gogh watercolor set. Some of my watercolors are from Van Gogh, some are from other brands. I have like a mixture. And I use this tube so that my cats won't be destroying my my paintbrushes, so it kind of keeps all my brushes together. This is a jar I actually found at the bottom of a lake while I was snorkeling. So I got a dark matte board because I can't find my black paper, and I got just a white watercolor paper here. So I'm going to try watercolor versus gouache. I'll show you guys what it's like from the palette and then what it's like from the tube. Pink from the watercolor. So that's with quite a bit of pigment. Now if I'm going to use less pigment, obviously you'll see through the back more, and when it dries it'll probably just look like a smear of blood or something. So now let's try watercolor straight from the tube. So I got Grumbacher, or Grumbacher, I'm not sure how it's said. Watercolor paint here. Oh god, it's a mess. Okay. So straight out of the tube. It's gonna be very thick, but I definitely don't suggest painting with watercolors like this because watercolors can be expensive, and the reason why they're expensive is because they're so high pigmented because they're being watered down. So let's just not doing that. Okay, so even though it's much more pigmented, oh man, this is why you don't scrunch your tubes up, because that happens and you lose tons of paint. Let's do the same thing but on the white paper, and then do a strip there. Looks great. That's what watercolor is meant for. And then it'll probably dry a little bit later, watered down. That's what it looks like. Watered down even more. Okay, so let's try gouache now on the darker paper. I'm gonna go from the palette. So that will probably stay that color. It might lighten up a bit actually, if anything, because that's sort of what gouache does. But I'm gonna try a different color, one that's lighter, so you guys can really see what it does. Okay. So now this will probably dry a little bit darker since it is a lighter tone. So that will probably stay about the same color. Whereas if I used around that same tone with watercolor, I wouldn't get the same result. So let's try using white watercolor and I'll show you guys that. So now I'm going to show you guys what a very similar color of gouache looks like in comparison to watercolor. This is straight out of the tube. Remember the one that was straight out of the tube of the watercolor was this one. So the one straight out of the tube with gouache. Is that one there. So this one up top actually dried darker, and I think it's because I had so much water mixed with it. But with gouache you normally take thicker amounts of paint, and you can add water to it to water it down like watercolor, so it basically turns into watercolor type paint. But you can also use it so it gets thicker and it actually stands out against dark backgrounds like that, and you can layer it up as well. The reason why I've been so hesitant to making this video is mainly because I am still fairly new to gouache. I only see slight variations between it and watercolor, but I figured you guys ask me about it all the time, so I might as well just do a video on it, showing you guys sort of how similar it is and what it's generally used for, the history of it and everything. Here's some gouache straight out of the tube on here. So that shows like how dark it is. It doesn't lose too much on a darker surface, but normally if you're working on a darker surface you'd mix a lot of like whites with it. So here it is watered down. And watered down some more. I like to use white gouache to tidy up bits of the paintings, add highlights. Yeah, that's them. They're pretty similar, guys. I definitely wouldn't be able to do something like this with watercolor, because what I did was I started with really light tones around here, and then I built it up darker, and then I realized after that I had to add a bunch of lighter tones, and you can't go in with watercolor afterwards to make lighter tones. You have to start really light and then go darker and darker and darker. So here, if I mess up, I can just go back in with some light tones and do that. And I imagine you can paint with watercolor, and then if you mess up that way as well, you could go in with gouache and make lighter tones. And with the blacks here, since I don't have black gouache, I actually used a Pentel Brush Pen. If you are planning on doing a like portrait type thing out of gouache, you definitely won't get the same type of blending as you would with something like oils. Alright, so apparently I forgot to press the record button, so I will show this to you guys again. So this is the final piece. I just used my Pentel Brush Pen and I did some dark bits here and there. Let's do a lighter tone. As an example, I'll show you guys sort of what it's like if you were trying to rework an area. So say I want to add a lighter area here. You can't get, well, it's more difficult to get a smooth gradient blend with gouache, so you have to work sort of in panels, which creates a really cool look, especially if you're working on, say, a piece with any type of architecture, because then it just looks really gritty and awesome. And I just used some white gouache straight out of the tube to add these little dots here to create the highlights. And since it's straight out of the tube, it's standing up pretty good against the darker gouache in the background. And yeah, it's turned out pretty decent. I guess it's just a sketch, so. But I hope this helped you guys. I don't know a whole lot about gouache. Like, I don't even know that much about watercolor or anything else I use. I just use it and I figure out my own way to work with it. So this is how I work with it, and I hope my explanations are somewhat understandable. I quite like this medium. It's pretty awesome. I'm super lazy, so watercolor, ink, and gouache is really good for me. I definitely suggest, if you are wanting to try out gouache, to get a half decent brand, but also maybe try just starting with 2 or 3 colors. There's nothing wrong with that, and if you don't like it, then you can always throw it up on, I don't know, Kijiji or Craigslist or whatever used website you use. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Please click like and subscribe for more, and if you guys have any other videos you want to see, please let me know and I'll do my best to record them for you. One more thing, since I know you guys might ask me, I've said this in other videos, but I'll say it again. The sketchbook that I use is just a regular standard sketchbook. It is the house brand for my the art store, local art store that I go to, called Island Blue, and yeah, it's just pretty standard. the paper isn't like super thick or anything, it's just normal paper, and I use gouache on it, I use watercolor on it, I use everything on it. It might wrinkle it a bunch, but I don't really care because it's a sketchbook. So if you go to your local art store or an art store near you, you might be able to find a house brand similar to this that's just super basic. But yeah, it's that's about it. It's just a simple sketchbook. Yeah, thanks guys for watching, and stay tuned for more. Bye!